Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Jake Thorne, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for the Sheep Gems Roundtable. Briefly, Sheep Gems is a collaborative project between several universities and the USDA, and the goal is really to improve robustness and climatic resilience in U.S. sheep populations through genomics. But to gather the necessary data to accomplish this, several industry cooperators, innovation flocks are working closely with the GEMS coordinators to capture and share a wide range of records on their animals. And so our goal today is to hear from some of these producers about their journey with sheep gems and their perspectives on how this technology might impact their operation. So here with me are four cooperators, each representing a different breed that's a part of Sheep Gems to share their experiences so far. And so I'm going to ask each of you that are on the call today to provide a little background about your operations. But as a brief introduction, we have Jeremy Geske on behalf of Suffolk, Kathy Bielik on behalf of Katahdins, Russell Cott with Rambouillets, and Todd Taylor with Polyphase. So first of all, thank you all for taking time away from your busy schedules to be on the call today. I really, really appreciate it. So we'll dive right into it. And Jeremy, I'd like to start with you. The way I see it on my screen, you're to my left. But could you provide us just with a little background about your operation and maybe the reason why Suffolk sheep for you?
Absolutely. So I grew up with Suffolk sheep. My dad was a Suffolk breeder and a sheep shearer, primarily selling terminal sires to the flocks in the neighborhood. And when I started 4-H, I got to pick a couple of ewes from his flock, and every year, keep my own replacements and add another ewe lamb from dad's flock until I had most of the sheep in my name. And so almost all of my ewes can be traced back to the early 70s to those individual sheep that I started with. I've always loved Suffolks for their growth rate, carcass quality kind of traits. And today, as my flock has moved from North Dakota to Minnesota, still primarily in the business of selling terminal sires. A lot of my rams go out west to the range states for that. I've been involved in NSIP for a couple of decades now, and also do have some market for selling purebred registered bucks and ewes to other breeders and 4-H projects and so forth as well. So.
Awesome. All right. Have you taken up the shearing trade like your dad too?
No, I shear a few of my own lambs, but I have not cut out to be a professional sheep shearer.
I understand. All right, Russell, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and maybe why Rambouillets?
Well, we were basically a range operation here in Texas, and we actually started with merinos back in 1945 as a family farm. And as my kids got older and got ready to show, we kind of looked for another breed to supplement that with, and we were able to buy one of the most historic herds here in the state of Texas in the Preston Ferris Rambouillet herd for my kids to show. So we basically added the Rambouillets to show, and we've kind of phased out the merinos. We've got about 25 head of merinos, and we're majority Rambouillets now because of the popularity within the state and within the nation of those. So, but we're mainly focused on wool and trying to keep this a range situation as far as raising these sheep in the range and producing animals that will survive out here in the country. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, Kathy, how about you? I'd like to hear a little bit about your operation and where you're located, and again, maybe why Katahdins.
Well, we're in Worcester, Ohio, and actually we started with Shetland sheep back in 2000. I used to like to do a lot of knitting and fiber work and thought that I would enjoy learning to spin. We joined our local sheep group, went to the first meeting and heard Dr. Charles Parker talk about Katahdins, the breed of the future. He thought they were great, easy care, no shear, parasite resistant. My husband said he was intrigued. He said that's what he wanted to do. So we were going to have his and her flocks. Yeah. We bought a couple Katahdins and found out that Katahdins had data. They had EBVs and weights and production data, and I got totally hooked. Jeff lost his flock. I took him over. He doesn't mind. He handles everything else on the farm, so it works out well. But yeah, I love the Katahdins. We have a small flock where this is our retirement farm now, so we just have 20, 25 ewes at a time. One of my biggest interests has been parasite resistance, so that's still a focus for us, and sell mostly seed stock and some meat lambs.
Awesome. Very good. All right, Todd, how about you? A little bit of background about your operation and Polypace.
So I would say I didn't choose Polypace. Polypace more or less chose me. So much like everybody, or like at least like Russell and Jeremy, I was born into the sheep business. My dad was a herdsman at University of Wyoming through the 70s into the 80s and retired in early 2000s. Grew up with, there raising Hamps, Suffolks, Rambouillets, and Columbias. Spent 7 years in College Station managing the sheep unit at Texas A&M and got involved with South Downs and the club lamb type sheep, and even had a few boar goats down there. So that had that experience. So coming to Wisconsin, I had never been involved with the Polypace. Started here in 2001 managing the sheep unit here, and we had about 60 Polypace ewes at that time. And my first thought on them damn things is literally they were stubborn, and pushing them through the work and shoots was a pain in the butt, and I wasn't real sold on them yet. Then the lambing season of 2002 hit, and I lambed those ewes out in the lambing jugs and realized how easy care and easy maintenance and easy doing they were, and good mothers they were. And I was pretty sold on the Polypace pretty quickly. So, like I said, growing up with those other breeds, and having struggles with ewes that didn't milk and ewes that didn't perform, so the university is running, right around 150 Polypace ewes currently. 2 or 3 years ago, we went through some transition where we thought we might be going to lose a lot of the sheep genetics here. And my wife decided that she wanted to protect some of our university genetics. So she invested in a few Polypace for our personal flock. So now we not only manage the sheep unit, but we also manage tailor-made Polypace, along with flocks of Hamps and Targies. And my son's got South Downs and Weather type, and I think we've even still got some Lincolns left. So we've got a hodgepodge, but I still really appreciate the Polypace and the value that they brought to the upper Midwest, and the ease of care. And just from a commercial sheep, they've been a super breed to deal with since I've been here. So
awesome. That's really good. Okay, Russell, I think I want to start with you on this next question, and this is going to be a little more specific to the GEMS project. I'd like to ask you, why did you become a collaborating innovation flock in the Sheep GEMS project? And what, once you kind of heard about the description, what excited you about this project from the get-go?
Well, it actually started before the true GEMS project started, because I was vice president of the Rambouillet Association when Ron came to us and wanted to do some DNA work on some Rambouillets, and was trying to do the initial groundwork to put some background to this project. And he came for financial support to the Rambouillet Association, and we were able to help fund that first 600 DNA units that he got on the Rambouillet deal. And that intrigued me because we basically don't have any DNAs and don't have any EPDs on the Rambouillet breed, or we didn't have anything hardly, except for a few flocks in NSIP. So that kind of intrigued me, and I got, he gave me the opportunity to be a innovator flock, and I jumped at the chance because I felt like it's a way that we can actually improve our herds within the Rambouillet breed, because we've got some EPDs that we didn't have before. We've got some things that are coming up that this genomics enhanced stuff can come and help us as far as selecting some traits that we're really looking for in the Rambouillet breed. So that's kind of where it started. It started with funding that initial DNA set of 600 Rambouillets that's actually the year before the GEMS project started. And then it put some background into the proposal to get the grant to start this GEMS project. So
okay. Now, Jeremy, you mentioned you're a longtime NSIP breeder, been involved with the technology for a couple decades. Suffolk is one of the popular breeds in NSIP. There's several breeders that use that technology. How about from your perspective? What excited you about the GEMS project, and what made you want to be an innovator flock too?
Well, my answer is going to be somewhat similar to Russell's. I'd worked with this kind of stuff in the past for collecting DNA for other projects with Dr. Lewis, and respected the work that he's doing. I studied genetics in grad school, and so I've always kind of had a passion for helping the sheep industry maybe catch up to some of the other species in our use of technology and genetics and EPDs. I think it's critical as we move forward. I was president of the United Suffolk Association when Dr. Lewis came to us with this idea and asked for our support. And our board had pretty strong support for that as well. And so both from a breed, looking at viability into the future and how do we add value to our breed, I think it's important to have this kind of information. Personally, I look at things like potential for parasite resistance, but also for me the stuff we're doing with the udders measurements and stuff. I call way too many ewes for mastitis, and if we can figure out a genetic component to that and do some selection to help me avoid that, that would mean the world to my flock. So that's why I value participating.
Sure, that's great. Now, Todd, you said that you've got your, kind of foot in the door in several different breeds and been involved for a long time. What was it about being involved, especially on behalf of the polypay breed, that that made you think this would be an exciting opportunity to participate in?
The things that Jeremy just pointed out, the longevity things, the disease traits that we're trying to maybe solve some genetic linkages to some of those, or resistance things. I mean, not only mastitis, but I'm also tracking how much we're treating foot scald and stuff like that, and trying to give those records to Ron too, hoping maybe someday we can see some EBVs, not only for udder health but foot health and things that we deal with in the wetter Midwest. And I know, the Katahdins are ahead of all of us and all of this stuff because they've been doing it for a few years longer than us. So it just made sense as a university to do this and to collaborate with this, and then to tie our personal flock into it as well. We're taking the same data. It's just got to be in two different files for the most part. And my son is actually, heavily involved in the polypays. He really enjoys the polypays as well. And he's pretty proud to be helping with this and collecting the data and helping disseminate some of that as well. So we're looking forward to seeing how. I mean, it may not happen, while I'm still at the university, but it's going to be fun to see how this all progresses and what it does for the sheep industry going forward.
Yeah, and that's really great to hear about your son and kind of the next generation of sheep producers using this technology right as kind of early in their exposure career in sheep production, and making, having that as something that is a constant. That's really cool. Kathy, now Todd mentioned it, that Katahdins are probably, quote unquote, a little farther ahead than some of the other breeds in terms of using genomics and EBVs and quantitative technology. So I'd like to hear also from your perspective, what is it that you think it was exciting, and what kind of convinced you to be a part of the project, knowing that you have several other breeders who in your breed who are doing some similar types of data collection?
Yeah, pretty much that. It seems like we've been involved in research with our Katahdins and with the bigger group just about since the beginning. I think we had our first SARE grant in 2004, and I've been involved in we've had 3 or 4 different SARE grants looking at parasite resistance, and I've been kind of the lead on those. I've worked with Dr. Joan Burke and Dr. Lewis on, a couple of Dr. Burke's grants over the years. So this was just kind of a real natural progression, it's just building on all of that past work. And yeah, I was excited, like several of the people here have mentioned, adding the new traits, besides the parasite resistance, the mastitis, some of those kind of things, and just looking at the overall resilience of
Kathy, have there been any challenges that you've experienced through the first year or two of this project that's been going on that maybe you didn't expect or are still working through as you're getting that data collected?
Not too much. Probably my biggest challenge is that darn spreadsheet. All the different codes, and I keep forgetting, and that's just not intuitive yet. And I mean, not that I don't keep spreadsheets on everything, but I don't know what it is about that one.
Yeah.
Other than that, most of the data I've already been collecting. There were a few new things, the udder scores, the lambing assistance. I had a different code myself, so that was just substituting different codes. But probably the udder scores is the only thing that I hadn't really been collecting already.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Well, everyone laughed when she mentioned the spreadsheet, so I'm thinking that's maybe a consistent theme across anyone. Does anyone else have any challenges that they maybe weren't prepared for, or didn't particularly have in mind when they jumped into this project, but are still kind of working through?
I guess for me, the biggest challenge is, I have a nice scale, but I don't have a nice working facility.
Yep.
And my brood ewes are a pain in the butt to get through there. In fact, the first time I tried to weigh the flock, it was in the fall and they're in good shape and they're in pretty full fleece because I shear in the fall, and I literally couldn't fit some of them into the scale. And so my son's in college, my daughter's about to go away to college, so dad's by himself again, and that's that part is a challenge, is getting the brood ewes weighed. The other stuff, I've been able to adapt my record system that I used to use to make it match the GEMS project. So there's still a few things where I now have records on 2 or 3 different pages instead of all in one page in order to fit everything in. But I've made the collection as easy as possible for me, and it was also helpful when Dr. Lewis said, if there's things that you just can't do, don't do them. And I'm not set up to do FAMACHA, so I'm not doing the FAMACHA, but I'm doing as much of everything else as I can because I was already doing almost all of that anyway, other than the udder scores and some of the weights. But I was monitoring body condition. I was doing all that. I maybe wasn't recording it like I am now, but at least it wasn't a foreign concept.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same thing. I would reiterate that is just keeping up with getting the data to where I can get it to Ron. And that's probably where I'm struggling the most is getting it to Ron timely enough that, he can get back and say, you need to fix this, this, and this, or check on these things. And so I'm a little guilty of that, but and then, we use your ear-tud, the Shearwell system and the Flock Master, whatever it is. Anyway, we use that system, and it works good for collecting data, or at least for collecting weights and body condition scores, but then extrapolating or taking those out of that system and putting them into Ron's spreadsheet. If I don't do it right away, I forget about it. And then I got to go back and, try to find it all and make it all match up and get all that taken care of. So, that's probably the biggest thing, is just the time that, to sit down and keep up with the record keep, or get the record, not necessarily keep up with the record keeping, but get it to where we can submit it to Ron. So,
yeah.
I guess for me, Jake, that I'm kind of like Todd, trying to get the information into the different spreadsheets that Ron wants is kind of difficult for me because I'm not real computer illiterate. So that's been, and I guess I told somebody the other day, I guess I told my daughter the other day, my ultimate goal is to get it in Ron's spreadsheet the first time and not have to do any corrections. And I don't know if that ever happened, but I think as a challenge for me is, I'm into the 3rd or 4th lambing season because we do lamb fall and spring here. One of the biggest challenges is to be faithful to taking this data and recording the data accurately, and not getting complacent with taking that data. We do FAMACHA, we do this, and after you get about the 10th or 15th ewe that's got the same FAMACHA score, you kind of get a little complacent with that. And I think it's a challenge to make sure that we take those figures, those things accurately. That way it'll help us in the long run. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for myself. You know, we have never done udder scores, and we don't go through the jug slamming. We go through a smaller pasture, so that's a little bit more difficult for us. Now we've been taking the body condition scores as a whole, but starting to do it on an individual basis for the animals is got a little bit more in depth for us, and that's helped. It's actually helped me keep a better set of records and keep a better idea on those sheep, what those sheep are doing. So
Right. And so Russell, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, some of the data that's being collected on your place and with your sheep and going into GEMS is new for you. But it sounds like, you know, particularly body condition scoring is something that even after the grant project is over, that might be something or a data point that you're still going to continue to capture and you find value in.
Yeah, most definitely. We're going to keep doing the individual, and we want to do the individual weight, because my ultimate goal here is to compare weaning weights to ultimate body weight on ewes and body condition, and my valuation on my ewes is a percentage of weaned lamb compared to the weight of the ewes. So you know, I think we can get too big in the range operation with our ewe herd. So what's more efficient for us, and that's what's helping us on that.
Yeah. Now, Kathy, has throughout this project, is there any new data points or kind of new records that you're keeping or capturing for this project that you know, particularly you find value in as far as implementing in your management long term and continuing to use?
Yeah, definitely the udder scores, the udder and teat placement. Yeah, that's something, and especially now that they're pointing out all the links of that to mastitis, and as I think Jeremy said, that's been an issue for us as well with mastitis. So yeah, that's definitely something I'll be paying attention to and tracking in the future.
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to ask you, Jeremy, the same question. You've been collecting a lot of data points for a long time. Is there something that's new in your management because of participating in this project?
Yeah, the udder scores, udder depths in particular, like I had kind of sort of anecdotally noticed an issue with some more pendulous udders in the past, and so it'll be interesting to see if that does play out and we establish a genetic linkage. And just thinking back to some of the DNA samples I was sending in this year, I've got some pretty young ewes that are already having some udder issues, and look back and guess what? They're all related. And so maybe there is some kind of a linkage there. Maybe that's a ewe family that I just need to get rid of and be done with that trouble. So that's interesting, and I can see that I would probably, especially if we establish some kind of genetic linkage, that I will continue to track that even after this project is over. The other, with the body condition, I had kind of started using that in kind of a selective deworming process. So when, rather than deworm every ewe all the time, several times a year, when I body condition, if they're in good shape, I just skip over them when I'm deworming, because we just have such an issue with resistance that I've gone to just deworming the very thin ewes. And if they're in good shape and they've weaned twins, and I just leave them alone, they obviously have some kind of natural resistance. So I don't know how to maybe incorporate that, but maybe we'll have an EPD for that at some point, and that'll match up with what I'm seeing visually as well. So.
Sure. Now, Todd, Polypay is obviously a very maternal breed. Is some of the udder information, teat scores, is that, how valuable are you finding that? And is that going to be something that you're going to continue to track moving forward?
I'd ultimately like to find these ewes that can physically raise triplets, and that udder score and some of those other teat placement things, I think, are going to have a huge effect on that. And then their maternal behavior too is something else that we got to look at, because those ewes got to be smart enough to let 3 lambs nurse and not just 2 of them and walk off. So I think, using udder scores and teat placements is something I'm going to continue to do. even after this is over with. And I'm like Jeremy, I see, some of these older ewes that have got good udders and have raised a lot of lambs are ewes that I want to keep daughters out of. But if they're older ewes that have raised, or younger ewes that have raised 4 or 5 lambs and have already gotten bad udder issues, then those are lines we probably don't want to proliferate anymore. So yeah, I definitely think that, and I'm using the weights and the body condition scores the same as Jeremy on our polypays, along with the fact that we have fecal egg count EBVs on the polypays now too. So with those 3 things together, I'm worming a lot more strategically than what I used to as well, or deworming. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at with that little handheld Sherwell device. I can click on it. I can see what I called them the last time. I can say, oh, they're two body condition scores thinner, or they've lost 20 pounds instead of gaining 20 pounds. Yeah, she probably is a good candidate to get dewormed without even doing a fecal sample on her. So, so I think those getting into the habit of doing those things, or even beyond the project, are going to be very useful tools as we move forward.
Sure. So it sounds like maternal ability, udder scores, teat scores is something that is pretty consistently across the group here, very valuable type information. And I think that kind of leads into my next question, in the sense that part of this project is obviously DNA testing. And while that information is going to be used by the coordinators to hopefully develop some genomic EVVs in the future, what that information can provide to all of you right now are some susceptibility and or resistance information to some various diseases or conditions. And hearing you talk about the udders and whatnot, it automatically brings ovine progressive pneumonia to mind. So I guess the next thing I want to ask you, now that you've got some data, DNA data, genomic data on susceptibility and or resistance to OPP and other conditions like scrapie, how is that type of information going to work into your management? I guess we'll start with you, Russell. I'd like to hear your perspective, please.
Well, I was really surprised when we started getting the DNA especially on the scrapies back on the Rambouillets, that there was a whole lot higher incidence of the QRs and the QQs than what we'd ever thought, because we haven't ever seen scrapies in our Rambouillet flocks in the state of Texas, and so it was really, really eye-opening to me. And I guess to do that, yeah, we haven't had any, but it's opened my eyes that we need to watch and make sure that we don't breed QQs to QQs and get more of those. As far as my herd's concerned, if I have any QQs, if they're not performing up to par with my weaning weights and things like that, I'm going to go ahead and cull them. But I'm going to make sure when I breed them that I breed them to the RR rams, and that's what they've always said all along. But we just haven't had that information in a Rambouillet herd. The OPP stuff is we really haven't got into it because we don't have that. I don't have that high incidence of susceptible OPP in the herd. So that's kind of that's something that we're watching, but it hadn't been an emphasis. But the emphasis on the RR, and I'm not necessarily saying we want to go to 100% RRs, but we want to watch what we do with our QQs as far as how we breed them, because we sure don't want any more QQs.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy, how about you? How valuable are you finding that information?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've always, I think pretty much always tested for scrapie resistance, so that's not new to us. The OPP, we've tested for OPP, but not the genetic testing. So that was really, I thought, enlightening, and I think will provide some good material for selection. In Katahdins, we also have the myostatin status, and that I find really interesting. It's not something that I've ever looked at before, but we do have a couple animals with it. So I don't think any of those are going to be my primary selection, but they certainly will be something that I take into consideration. And, given two animals with similar, EBVs or other traits, that might be it'll be something I certainly
One more
consider.
thing to consider, yeah.
One more thing to consider, right?
Yeah. Jeremy, how about you? How are you going to incorporate that into your management too?
Yeah, so 15 years ago that would have been great, but my flock has been 100% RR for 15 years now. So that part isn't really all that valuable to me, other than it confirms that the new stud rams I've bought and were in fact RR. So I mean, there's always good to have that insurance, I guess. Again, with Spider, cleaned that out of my flock 20 years ago. So it's nice to have it, but not really necessary for me. OPP, I know it can be an issue, but I look at it as, in Suffolk's particular, it sort of weeds itself out. If they get it, they don't live very long and they're out of your herd. So it's nice to know, sure, but it probably, again, won't be something I'll place a lot of emphasis on. Now, there might be some other traits, like as a breed, we just adopted basically a zero tolerance policy for the dwarf gene. So if we identify individuals that are carriers and we can call them out of the registry, I see that as something that's good. I don't think I have any of that, but you sometimes buy a ram, you never know. So
Yeah, sure.
but I'll be more interested, with some of the other newer stuff that comes out, and just having it. I think that will eventually be more data is always a good thing. So.
Absolutely. Todd, how about you?
Yeah, the OPP one is probably the biggest. I mean, I'm kind of the same way on the scrapie. We've been testing for scrapie and polypace for years, and for the most part, we're pretty predominantly RR. But when Rusty was in grad school, 10, 15 years ago now, I can't remember how many years it was, but we darn near screwed up his research project because of the level of OPP we found in the flock that first year when he was doing his studies. So we knew we had OPP, and we went through the painstaking process of testing twice a year and culling positives and keeping the positives and gray ones separate, and spent about 8 years doing that until we could finally determine the flock was 100% OPP free. We haven't had a ewe test positive for OPP in any of the 3 breeds we've got here for about 5 years now. But had we had the resistance factor, I think we could have gone through it a little faster, because kind of now that we're starting to get DNA back, it's interesting to find out that we're about 98% 1-1s on resistance. So we did it the hard way, but I think we're there now to where we're predominantly resistant, or at least lower susceptibility to OPP at this point. So the other thing that I've found handy is the parentage testing, because there's notoriously, I'll go to the barn or wake up in the middle of the night and there'll be 10 polypay lambs running around the drop pen and 4 ewes claiming them, and you do the best you can. That we even use cameras that are recording, and I go back and watch the records and see if I can figure out who belongs to who. But I guarantee that there's some parentage crossover there that's this DNA testing is helping immensely with on that. So just getting those pedigrees correct and some of those things. So that's become very handy.
If I could add to that, Todd, I totally agree with that last point too. And also, on days when I switch rams, you go from the main ram to the cleanup ram, inevitably there's a ewe that gets marked by both of them. And so just having that parentage to confirm, or like you said, you got the boss ewe that claims every lamb born, and trying to get those straight, that can be very valuable. So
on your switches like that, how many times have you found a set of twins, one out of each ram?
So far I haven't, but I've heard of several others who have, and so that would be. I'm still not sure how either the NSIP database or the registry would accept that.
My dad used, just a side story. My dad used to use a Rambouillet ram and a Suffolk ram as cleanup on all of his ewes, and he notoriously every year have at least one ewe that would have one of each.
Yep.
He'd have a speckle-faced lamb and a black lamb, or vice versa, depending on, he'd always get those on those crosses. So I know it can happen.
Yeah, it definitely can happen. Just to add a little bit of myself, we use multi-sire mating schemes pretty much predominantly. And so multiple bucks out with the ewes, and the parentage information is necessary because we're pasture lambing, first of all, and we want to know the sire, and can't figure that out. And I would say that our split parentage in the sets of twins is much higher than just 1 or 2. We're probably close to a quarter of the twins are split parentage, which is interesting. Now that's not necessarily scientifically proven in our sheep yet, but it's pretty common. Yeah. Okay, so the parentage information is really valuable. The genomic information is really valuable. Does anyone have another kind of discovery that they've learned about their sheep through this process. May it be some of the FOMACHA scoring, the body condition scoring, the udder issues or non-issues. Has there been any discoveries that you've really learned that have really opened your eyes and you've been appreciative of and plan to continue to evaluate going forward? Jeremy, do you have something in mind?
Well, there was something that I started to pay more attention to, particularly as my kids have gone away and dad has to do all the work by himself, and that's just disposition. Suffolks are a large breed, and if they're excessively flighty, it's can be dangerous working with them, and so I've started to place more emphasis on attitude or disposition, whatever you want to call it, in my selection criteria, and I'm the chance to win a purple ribbon doesn't mean much if I'm getting drug around the barn. So there's some sheep that are getting culled for disposition reasons, and that's not really part of this project, but I think as our sheep have gotten bigger, it's a factor, and I know some of my customers don't want to deal with large sheep that are hard to work with. So having sheep that are, the more data you have to collect, the more times you run them through a chute, the more things you want to catch and tag and DNA sample. Having sheep that are a little calmer, a little gentler, a little easier to work with is more important to me now than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Russell, how about you? Any discoveries? As you've mentioned, you've got several.
I can add to Ron's deal. When we go to working and running these sheep through the chute, I can tell you exactly which ewes are going to be the last one to go in the chute and the ones that I have to beat. So there is a disposition. I guess the striking thing to me as we got into this project, we changed our management process a little bit as far as strictly lambing range situation, big pastures. Not paying a whole lot of attention to, how many twins, how many singles. And when we got into it, we started when we go to lambing, we go into small pastures where we can individually lamb those ewes. And the incidence of twins and with that management has been exponentially greater. And most of us range people, we like twins, we like that 120%, but a 70 or 80% lamb crop back in the olden days was about normal for us, and we went from that to 150% lambing percentage by applying this management, so we could take these measurements on these ewes. And I'd have never bet that this set of ewes here would have been able to have 100, because they've never been selected for twins, would ever be that to that 150% lambing percentage. And we've actually even had some triplets born this last year that the ewes have raised all those triplets. So I think this has helped us as far as the management part of it, to be able to watch these ewes and take care of them better, and know more of what we're having and what was happening before with I guess I call it so-called poor management, but it was the case of this is what we've always done. And when we've changed our management part of it, that's what really opened my eyes and amazed me on what these Rambouillet ewes can do.
Sure. Now, Todd and Kathy, both of you've got fellow breeders within your breed that are pretty intensive in their management or have been collecting a lot of data and heavily involved in NSIP. If you were visiting with them or speaking with them, what would you share as a discovery about your involvement in this project, or an outcome that you're learning about your sheep through this project that maybe they would find interesting or intriguing? Is there something coming to mind, Kathy?
Well, gosh, when you phrase it like that, Gene, I have to stop and think a little more.
Made it more complicated. Sorry.
You did. One of the things that, as I've been listening to Jeremy and Russell talk, one thing that we've always done, and this is something that I've talked with several other breeders about, is just a ewe efficiency score. Where I look at the weight of the ewe versus the lambs, the weight of the lambs. But one of the things that has come up that has made me think a little bit more because of this study is that I don't necessarily just want a ewe that raises a lot of lambs, even if she's efficient. I'm also wanting to look at her body condition score now and her udder score, and kind of looking at more of the total package. I mean, if she's weaning a lot of lambs, but she's in a body condition score of 1.5,
Was it worth it? Right.
yeah, what is that? So yeah, so I'm kind of, yeah, it's interesting talking with some of the others about that. And then again, the udder scores, and I'm really hope to continue to incorporate that into that selection.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I know that one of the key motivating factors of this project is not just to measure sheep, but measure the ability of those sheep to perform in with some adaptability, some climatic resilience, some robustness in their environment. And so those traits that you mentioned really fit into that category very, very well. Todd, do you have anything to add on that?
No, not, I mean, just in general, one of the frustrations that I've had with the polypays on NSIP is there's so many breeders, or I shouldn't say so many, there's a good number of breeders that really chase that number born EBV and push it higher and higher and higher, and don't spend enough time looking at their number weaned EBV. And to me, that's just backwards from what we ought to be doing. And I'm hoping that maybe these udder scores and some of these resilience factors that we're measuring can shed some light on, are we doing this backwards? Is number born really that strong, or is that number weaned making more sense? And having that good either two equal numbers or a certain split, a slightly higher number weaned than number born, to me is what I'm shooting for. And I'm hoping that looking at the longevity in the milk and some of those kind of things will even that out a little bit more. But to me, that's always been a problem within the polypay breed in NSIP, is too many guys that simply look at, they want a 300% lamb crop, and I don't know where those other lambs are going that they're not weaning. Let's put it that way. So
Yeah.
I know how hard it is to raise or artificially rear lambs, and it's not something that I want to do. So if I can keep that balance a little better, I'd be a lot happier within the breed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
I could jump in, Jake, and just add to that,
Yeah.
with the Suffolk side, obviously as a terminal sire, our NSIP folks are focusing very heavily on the Carcass Plus or whatever. But at the same time, as a breeder, I need the maternal traits. I can't just forget about them. Otherwise, I'm producing a flock of hard doing sheep, and I don't want that either. And so I'm hoping that these, even though we don't necessarily think of the maternal traits as a huge focus of the Suffolk breed, we can't forget about them. And so, I'm hoping that this will help us, create a sheep that still does its job on the terminal side, but can be a little better maternally and longevity as well. So,
yeah. Well, maybe
And
that.
Jake,
Hoping the Suffolks will figure that out so I can translate into the Hamps too after you make all of the mistakes. So.
Exactly.
Go ahead,
one
Kathy.
other thing on the body condition and the ewe efficiency is the parasite resistance. And I think that selecting, or identifying those ewes that can maintain their body condition while still being extremely efficient, I think you're going to find are also the ones that are probably the more parasite resistant. So those all tie together, I think, kind of nicely.
Yeah, kind of under that adaptability to environment, umbrella. Absolutely.
I may add, Jake, I talk to a lot of Rambouillet breeders that are on NSIP, and a lot of them they're kind of like Todd said, they're hung up on number of lambs born. And my first figure when I look at that is the number of lambs weaned more so than number of lambs born, because they're not any good to me if they're born but don't get weaned. So I think that's an important number. In all of these maternal traits tie into it, the fecal and udder scores and everything. It's a multi-trait deal that ties into that. So I think, with Kathy, the fertility and the maternal trait that ties into that is all important.
Absolutely. So I have one more major question for you all. And again, I'm to encourage you all to jump in as you have thoughts, but this is more philosophical. So genetic selection, participation in GEMS, and what we learn from GEMS, everyone here realizes that we are playing kind of the long game. Making these changes through genetic selection are not something that are going to occur in 1 or 2 generations. We can make maybe some small advancements, but it's this, we're trying to look into the future really as where we want to go for our breeds and as a sheep industry. So I'd be interested to hear your outlook on what establishing a legacy for the future of the U.S. sheep industry means to you and your operation. It really made me think of it, Jeremy, when you talked about thinking about the maternal side of a terminal breed. But I want to give you the chance and open the floor to maybe expand on that and think about, what would be the legacy of your operation going forward, or in maybe the next generation that takes it over.
Well, yeah, I think for me, when I was thought about this project and whether I wanted to participate or not, it really was an easy choice for me. And I think back, somebody many years ago, a producer just like me, had to get started and participate and help get the very first EBVs developed that I'm using. And I believe in the system. I believe in the program. It's not perfect, and I'm vocal about trying to change the things that I think need to be changed. And one way to do that is to step up and participate. And so for me, if the things that we learn in this project help future generations, that then it's well worth it. Whether I see a tremendous benefit myself in the time that I have left raising sheep isn't as important as are we doing the right thing to help the industry going forward. And that's just how I look at it. And I think that's part of being a leader and doing what you think is right. So I guess that's why I chose to participate.
Sure. Russell, how about you? Thinking about, you've already made some pretty big operational changes. You talked about going from merinos to Rambouillets and kind of how you operate, but any other future things that you kind of like to leave as a legacy from your operation?
Yeah, I guess the legacy for me is we were a family operation when we started in 45, and we're going to continue to hopefully continue. My kids continue it as far as their family is their legacy. We're not going to see the total benefits of this project ourselves because it's a long-term project. But hopefully, if my kids decide to carry on with the project, that they can see some of the stuff that's done. And I guess as far as our legacy is concerned, wool sheep have been important to us for a long time. And I got a daughter that worked on the wool index and developed the wool index for NSIP. So that's kind of a legacy for us. And I think she's really interested in this GEMS project. She actually wanted to sit in and listen to the panel talk, and I said, no, you got to listen to it when it's done. But she's really interested in it, and hopefully she will continue on with the project because it's a 5-year project, and then what becomes of it is going to be what we get out of it right now. That hopefully it'll continue into their generation. So,
absolutely, Kathy, how about you?
Well, one of the, I think, things that have kept me or got me interested in research in the beginning and kept me there is Dr. Charles Parker became my mentor. And one of the things he used to tell me often actually was the biggest threat to the sheep industry isn't parasites or predators, it's tradition. And that's really kind of helped fuel my interest or desire to research and change. And I guess one of the things that I feel good about this project is that even as a very small flock, which we are, it feels good to have made, hopefully some kind of an impact or given something back to the industry. The sheep industry in general, Katahdin breed especially, the people are just fantastic, and yeah, like people here have said, I'm not going to see the results of most of this at this stage in my career. But a lot of those other people who have become very, very dear friends, hopefully they will, and the sheep industry in general will hopefully profit from this. It needs to happen. We need to, these advances are necessary, I think.
Yeah. Todd?
I sit here and think about it, and to me, I've been managing sheep units at universities for 30 years, and my dad for 30 years prior to that. And just thinking back of we've both kind of struggled with our positions at times, and struggled with, with research projects that have come and gone. And especially here in Wisconsin, it just seems like the number of projects that we've done here, that not that they don't have meaning and they don't have value, but that have had value directly onto the sheep industry, have been kind of few and far between. There's some offshoots of the projects that we've done that have helped somebody somewhere in the sheep business, but to me, this one is more full-fledged and is going to have a larger impact on sheep production in the United States, and not just in a region, but all over the US. And I think being involved in something like that I can see having a long-lasting effect on the overall industry is just really rewarding. And I think it would be really rewarding to my dad too. And to see something like, and be involved in something like this. And then, like I said, my kids are interested in it, much like Russell's kids. My older son is, my younger son's still into the clubland business and still thinks he wants to play around in that. But the older boy kind of sees the value of what we're doing. And I think the younger one is, once he is finally officially done with youth shows, I think he will see the value of more commercial production too. And my daughters are both interested in sheep as well. It's just that they aren't set up to really take care of any of them right now. But so I'm hoping that, like Russell, that my kids will go on with it as well and continue it, even though they're smart enough to not follow in their dad's footsteps and become a university employee. But but hopefully they'll be able to continue this on a private scale as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts. If you have anything else that you'd like to share or leave the audience with, you've provided some great advice and some great final thoughts, but I certainly want to provide the kind of the last chance here if you have anything else that you maybe didn't get said throughout the discussion today. You're more than welcome to share.
I guess the only other thing I would add is if there were some flocks that were sort of on the fence whether they were going to participate or not, just to encourage them to get involved at whatever level they can. I think whether it's Dr. Lewis or others have been very helpful in saying, if you look at the whole project, you think, God, I got to do all these 90 different things. It can be a little intimidating, but you don't have to do that. You can take what you're already doing and maybe add 2 or 3 additional things that you keep records on. And that's all you really have to do. And the DNA testing, once I actually read the instructions, which is helpful, that went really simple. And I just went through in the lambing jug and took samples on every ewe and every lamb this year, and it took a matter of seconds. So I guess encourage people to participate. If you're already collecting most of this data anyway, why not be part of the project and help us reach the critical mass of DNA samples where we can get some useful information out of it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's encouraging hearing each of you talk about the challenges of being things that are just kind of short-term specifics, spreadsheet, or how things are being communicated, whatnot. But the benefits everyone mentioned, the technology and how this is going to impact their operations or the sheep industry or their breeds going forward, and so that's really promising. And I think not just the audience that's going to be watching this meeting, but also the coordinators of this project are probably going to really appreciate that.
Well, and the technology is going to become more affordable too. It takes time, but it's going to become more affordable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, once again, thank you all for being on the call. This has been great information. I think anyone that, like you said, Jeremy, is on the fence or just involved in the sheep industry in any way can take something away from this meeting, the project in general, where we're going with technology and sheep. I think the opportunities in the future is really bright for small ruminants in the United States. And I'm excited to be a part of it, and I'm appreciative that all of you who are a part of it took some time today to share your thoughts. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
With that, we'll call it good.
Thank you.